Mississippi is older than almost anyone gives it credit for. People have been building here for more than 10,000 years, and they left their mark in earth. Hundreds of mounds, some older than Rome, scattered across the state in plain sight. Most people drive right past them. Today we are looking at the strangest of them, a 1,000-year-old chief's mound that the state turned into a highway rest stop, picnic tables and all. A ceremonial center abandoned after barely a century, for reasons its own historical marker admits no one understands. A sacred mound that has never been dug, because the people who own it will not allow it. And at number 1, the second largest earthen monument on the continent, 8 acres, built one basket of dirt at a time. Stick with us to the end for that one. If you like deep dives into forgotten history and the places most maps ignore, subscribe now. We post stories like this every week. Today we are counting down 10 ancient structures in Mississippi that no one can fully explain. Number 10. Pocahontas Mounds. The 1,000-year-old mound with a picnic table on it. The most accessible ancient monument in Mississippi sits in the median of a 4-lane highway. You pull off US 49 north of Jackson, park in a small lot, and walk up steps to the flat top of a mound that a Native American chief once ruled from. More than 1,000 years ago, there are 2 mounds here. Mound A is a rectangular platform around 20 feet tall, possibly taller when it was built. Mound B, a conical burial mound about 9 or 10 feet, sits across the highway on private land. They were raised in stages between roughly 750 and 1600 AD by people of the Coles Creek and later Plaquemine Mississippian cultures. In 2004, archaeologists from Mississippi State University found the remains of a mud-plastered log building on top of Mound A, the house most likely, of a chief or a structure for ceremony. Here is the part that gets people. When US 49 was widened in the mid-20th century, one of the mounds was nearly bulldozed for the roadbed. The state chose a different path. In 1968, the Mississippi Highway Department turned the surviving mound into the state's first modern roadside rest stop. Restrooms, running water, picnic tables, and barbecue grills right on top of it. For nearly 30 years, travelers grilled lunch on the seat of a vanished chief's power. The amenities were finally pulled out in 1997 after repeated vandalism. The mound is still there, preserved now with interpretive signs on the Mississippi Mound Trail. You can park and climb it in about 5 minutes. A town nearby took the name Pocahontas, after the famous Powhatan woman from the East Coast. She never set foot in Mississippi, and had nothing to do with the people who built these mounds. The name was simply borrowed. Somehow that fits a place where a sacred monument once shared a parking lot with a barbecue grill. Number 9. Ingomar Mounds, the Lost 14. There used to be 14 of them. 2,200 years ago, people of the Middle Woodland period raised a complex of 14 earthen mounds across about 70 acres of flat terrace in what is now Union County, in North Mississippi. It was a gathering place and a burial center, and it pulled in materials from astonishing distances: copper, galena, greenstone, hauled in from hundreds of miles away along trade networks that crossed half a continent. Then time and farming went to work. By the late 1800s, plows had shaved most of the mounds down by several feet. Treasure hunters gutted others. Smithsonian archaeologists arrived in the mid-1880s, mapped what was left, and carted away hundreds of objects for their collection. Of 14 mounds, 13 are essentially gone. One remains. It is called Mound 14, and it is enormous, a platform roughly an acre across, standing close to 30 feet, among the largest middle woodland platform mounds anywhere in the southeast. It has reforested now, so in summer the trees hide it. But in winter, when the branches are bare, you can see it for what it is. Crisp human-made corners, a deliberate flat top, a structure that would have stopped anyone crossing this flat country in their tracks. When archaeologists looked inside the mound, they found something they still cannot explain. The builders had packed it in alternating layers of different colored clay, stacked deliberately, color on color. For a reason no one has been able to work out, it clearly meant something. We just do not know what. There is one more loose thread. A Spanish silver artifact was reportedly recovered at Ingomar in the 19th century, now held by the Union County Museum. The mounds are 2,000 years older than any Spanish presence in Mississippi. So how a piece of European silver ended up at the site is its own small unanswered question, a hint of contact-era activity layered on top, something far more ancient. Today the site is a 63-acre preserve owned by the Archaeological Conservancy, with a marked walking trail open from dawn to dusk. The Smithsonian map and a selection of those carted-off artifacts are now on loan back to the Union County Heritage Museum in New Albany. 14 mounds became one. The people who built them measured their work in baskets of colored earth, and we are left looking at the single survivor, trying to read a language nobody wrote down. Number 8. The Bynum Mound and Village Site. The woman between the burned logs. In the late 1940s, as crews built the Natchez Trace Parkway through Chickasaw County, National Park Service archaeologists opened the mounds at a place called Bynum. There were 6 of them, low conical domes between roughly 5 and 14 feet high, built 2,000 years ago by Middle Woodland people who hunted, gathered, and grew a few crops near a forerunner of the old trace. Inside the largest mound, they found a grave. A woman had been laid out between 2 parallel oak logs that had been deliberately burned. At each of her wrists was an ornamental copper spool. Near her lay the remains of 2 adult men and a child. It is the kind of burial that tells you, without a single written word, that this was someone who mattered. The copper is the part that should stop you. There is no copper source in Mississippi. The metal at her wrists had traveled from the Great Lakes region, more than 700 miles, and it was not the only thing. The graves at Bynum held flint from as far as Ohio, greenstone from the Alabama-Tennessee Piedmont, and marine shell from the Gulf Coast. These were people often described as simple hunter-gatherers, and yet they were plugged into a trade and ceremonial network. The Hopewell Exchange system that stretched across the eastern half of the continent. The largest mound, Mound B, covered something stranger still, a log-lined crematory pit. On its ash-covered floor, archaeologists found human remains, some burned, some not, and an L-shaped row of 29 polished greenstone axe heads, laid out with obvious care. And all of this happened around 2,000 years ago, long before any centralized civilization is usually credited in this corner of the country. A community in North Mississippi was honoring its dead with treasure carried in from the Great Lakes and the Gulf, and arranging stone axes in patterns we can see but not read. 2 of the mounds were restored after the excavation. They sit today on a quiet stretch of the Natchez Trace Parkway at milepost 232.4. A kiosk, a short paved loop, 15 minutes start to finish, free, dawn to dusk. Some of what was found is displayed at the Parkway Visitor Center near Tupelo. You can stand at the spot in under a minute. The woman who was buried there with copper from 1,000 miles away waited 2,000 years for someone to find her. We still do not know her name. Number 7. Pharr Mounds. The 8 domes the size of 100 football fields. Spread across 90 acres near the Prentiss-Itawamba County line, off the Natchez Trace at milepost 286.7, are 8 enormous earthen domes. 90 acres is roughly 100 football fields laid side by side. The largest mound is about 165 feet across and rises close to 18 feet. It is the largest, most important archaeological site in all of northern Mississippi. It was built around 2,000 years ago, in the first 2 centuries AD, by Middle Woodland people of what archaeologists call the Miller culture. And the puzzle of Pharr is not who built it. It is how, because the people who raised these mounds did not live here full-time. They were largely mobile. They moved across the upper Tombigbee headwaters through the seasons and came back to this rolling green flat to bury and honor their dead. A village that predates the mounds by as much as 400 years was found nearby. But the mound builders themselves were on the move. And still, they reached across a continent. A 1966 excavation of 4 of the mounds found human remains, some cremated, resting on carefully prepared clay floors above old fire pits. With them were copper spools and other goods that did not come from Mississippi. The artifacts tie these people to the Hopewell interaction sphere, the same vast trade and ceremonial network centered far away in Ohio and Illinois. A nomadic society somehow organized the labor to move tens of thousands of basket loads of earth, and the connections to pull copper from the Great Lakes into the Mississippi hills. That is the genuine open question at Pharr. Not a mystery of lost builders, we know exactly who they were, but a mystery of capacity. How a people with no permanent town and no draft animals built monuments on this scale, and traded across distances that would take months to walk. All 8 mounds survive today, 4 of them easy to pick out from the parking area. The Park Service preserves the site with interpretive signs, but there is no trail out across the field. You take it in from the edge, across an open, windswept clearing where photographers describe the line of domes as almost wave-like. 8 grass-covered domes in an empty field, raised by people who were barely here. They kept coming back to bury their dead in this one spot for 200 years, and then they stopped. The field has been waiting ever since. Number 6. Owl Creek Mounds. The city that quit after 100 years. Some places fade. This one just stopped. Deep in the Tombigbee National Forest, about 3 miles off the Natchez Trace near New Holka, there once stood a 5-mound ceremonial center with a central plaza and a village around it. When it was active, around 900 years ago, it was the single largest mound site for thousands of square miles in every direction. The dominant gathering place in the region. The center of everything, locally speaking. It lasted about 100 years. That is the strange thing about Owl Creek. Radiocarbon dating pins the whole site to a remarkably tight window, roughly 1100 to 1200 AD. Built, used, and abandoned inside a single century, barely longer than a few human lifetimes. Among major Mississippi sites, that is unusual. Most were occupied for centuries. Owl Creek is almost a snapshot of one Mississippian generation, raised and then walked away from. Here is the detail that stops people cold. The official historical marker at the site, put up by the U.S. Forest Service and Mississippi State University, not by some tabloid, flatly states that the purpose of the ceremonies held here, and the reason the place was abandoned, both remain a mystery. When the government's own sign tells you no one knows why everyone left, you are looking at a genuine unanswered question. Archaeologists have theories. A team from Mississippi State, led by Janet Rafferty, excavated in 1991 and 1992 and found the remains of structures on 3 of the mounds. The proposed explanations for the abandonment range from epidemic disease to drought or some other environmental shock. None of them has been confirmed. People built a regional capital, used it for a century, and vanished from it, and the best we can do is guess. One more odd touch. One of the mounds was built not as the usual rectangle or dome, but in a deliberate crescent shape. Another small choice we can see and cannot interpret. Today, 2 of the original 5 mounds survive, preserved by the Forest Service with walkways, interpretive panels, and a picnic area with Davis Lake Recreation Area nearby. The other 3 mounds in the village are gone. The setting now is forest, pine and hardwood closing in, wind in the branches, a real sense of isolation that the open trace sites never have. A place that was once the center of the world for everyone within 100 miles, swallowed by woods, with a government sign at the entrance that essentially shrugs and admits defeat. If you are finding this one as strange as I am, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Of everything so far, which mystery sits with you the most? The colored clay at Ingomar, or a whole city that quit after 100 years? We read every reply. We are halfway through now, and the second half gets heavier. The sites from here on were either drowned, witnessed by the people who destroyed them, or are considered so sacred that no one is allowed to study them at all. Number 5. The Jaketown site. The Drowned Mounds. Most of Jaketown is underground, and not because anyone buried it on purpose. Near Belzoni, in the flat, wet heart of the Yazoo Mississippi Delta, lie some of the oldest earthworks in the entire lower Mississippi Valley. The earliest stages of the mounds here date to roughly 1500 to 1350 BC, the late Archaic, the Poverty Point culture. That makes parts of Jaketown around 3,500 years old, older than the trace sites by millennia, older than most of what people picture when they think of ancient America. 18 mounds were originally recorded at the site. You can see 3. The rest are gone from view, buried under about 10 feet of river flood deposits. The Mississippi and its tributaries did here what they have always done. Catastrophic flooding rolled across the Poverty Point landscape and sealed it under thick layers of silt. Later peoples returned, built new mounds on top of the old ones, and over 3,000 years the cycle repeated. The result is a layered, partly drowned site where archaeologists estimate portions of as many as 13 mounds may still be down there, known to exist, but mostly unseen. And here is the consequence of all that mud. The visible mounds at Jaketown have never been properly excavated. Their construction is dated mainly from broken pottery found on the surface, not from digging. The deepest, oldest layers sit beneath 10 feet of flood deposit, essentially out of reach. We know Jaketown is one of the oldest mound sites in the valley, and we know it was a node in the Poverty Point trade network that reached the Ouachita and Appalachian Mountains, the upper Mississippi, even the Great Lakes. But the site is largely studied from the outside in. It was settled when it was a sandbar island in a river channel, more than 3,000 years ago, and the river has been riding over it ever since. Today, Jaketown is a National Historic Landmark, designated in 1990. 3 overgrown mounds are visible from the roadside, though the site itself is not openly accessible. The Jaketown Museum in nearby Belzoni holds artifacts from both the Poverty Point and Mississippian periods. There is something fitting about it. A people built monuments on a river island, the river drowned them in mud, another people built on top, and the river came again. 3,000 years of human effort, filed away under 10 feet of delta silt, waiting for a question we have not figured out how to ask yet. Number 4. Winterville Mounds, the 55-foot temple in the Flatlands. The delta is famously, relentlessly flat, so when something rises 55 feet straight up out of it, you notice from a long way off. That something is the Temple Mound at Winterville, just north of Greenville, 55 feet of earth, raised by hand, one of the 10 tallest earthen structures in the entire United States, and the tallest mound anywhere between Natchez and Cahokia, the great site up in Illinois. From the top, the builders could once see the Mississippi River, about a mile off when construction began. It did not stand alone. Winterville was a sprawling ceremonial center. At least 23 platform mounds originally surrounded several large open plazas. Today, 12 or more are still visible. The site is important enough that archaeologists named an entire cultural phase after it, the Winterville phase of the Plaquemine Mississippian culture. The bulk of the construction happened in a few generations, around 1200 to 1250 AD. And here is the part that does not fit our expectations. A place this big, with a temple visible for miles, sounds like it should have been a city. It was not. Almost nobody lived there. The Winterville people lived spread out across the delta on small family farms. Only a small elite, leaders, religious officials, actually resided at the mound center. The rest of the time, this enormous complex stood largely empty, a stage that filled with people only for ceremony and then emptied out again. A monumental capital with almost no permanent population. In 2007, archaeologists from the University of Southern Mississippi dug near one of the mounds and found a pit, dating to around 1200 AD, packed with layers of animal bone and broken pottery. Squirrel, rabbit, waterfowl. It looks like the debris of feasts, possibly tied directly to the building of the mound. People gathered, built, and feasted here, then returned to their farms. The mounds did not survive untouched. For generations, this was plantation and tenant farm land, and plowing and grazing slowly ate away at the Great Mound. By the 1930s, the largest mound had been noticeably reduced and its ceremonial ramp nearly erased. What saved it was not a government or a university. It was the Greenville Garden Club, which raised the money to buy the 42-acre tract and handed it to the state. Today, Winterville is a Mississippi State Park and a National Historic Landmark. You can walk the grounds and climb the 55-foot Temple Mound for the same view the builders had. Visitors are asked to treat it as what it is, a sacred burial ground, a temple the height of a 5-story building, in the flattest country in America, built by people who mostly chose to live somewhere else. They raised it for the gathering, not the dwelling, and then they went home. Number 3. The Grand Village of the Natchez Indians, the last living temple. By the time Europeans reached the American Southeast, almost every great mound center was already a ruin. The big Mississippian capitals had risen and fallen centuries before any Frenchman or Spaniard saw them. The mounds were grass-covered hills, with no one left who remembered building them. The Grand Village, in what is now the city of Natchez, was the exception. This one was still alive. The ancestors of the Natchez began raising these mounds around 1350 AD. But unlike almost everywhere else, the site never went quiet. By the late 1600s, the Grand Village on the banks of St. Catherine Creek was the beating capital of the Natchez chiefdom, the seat of its paramount chief, a sacred leader the French called the Great Sun, and his brother, who carried the title Tattooed Serpent. And because the French were right there, building a colony around Fort Rosalie, they wrote it all down. This is what makes the Grand Village different from every other site on this list. We are not guessing at what happened on these mounds. There are eyewitness accounts. A 1723 French map shows at least 6 mounds at the site. French observers described the temple that stood atop the Temple Mound, and the sacred fire kept burning inside it, a perpetual flame, symbolic of the sun, from which the royal family claimed descent. The fire was never allowed to go out. The temple also held the bones of the chiefs who had come before. The French also witnessed the funerals, and the funerals were extraordinary, in the most unsettling sense. When Tattooed Serpent died in 1725, the ceremony recorded by the French included retainers who were ritually put to death so they could accompany him beyond it. This was not legend passed down through centuries. It was watched and written by people standing in the plaza. That closeness between the Natchez and the French did not hold. Tension over land and labor built for years, and in 1729 the Natchez attacked the French at Fort Rosalie. The French response, with their allies, was devastating. Within a couple of years, the Natchez were broken as an independent people, scattered, killed, or sold. The last functioning Temple Mound society in North America ended, not in some slow prehistoric fade, but in a colonial war that was thoroughly documented on both sides. So the mystery here is not who built it, or why it was abandoned. We know. The harder thing to sit with is what was lost: a living, breathing religious world, a god king, an eternal fire, a whole ceremonial order that existed into the 18th century and was then deliberately destroyed inside a single generation. Today, the Grand Village is a 128-acre park inside Natchez, free to enter, administered by the state and recently renamed the Natchez Tribal History Center. 3 of the original mounds survive. 2 have been excavated and rebuilt to their original shape. There is a reconstructed Natchez house, a museum, and a nature trail. Each year, the Natchez powwow brings living native culture back to the ground. The French left detailed records of the great sun and his sacred fire because they found it astonishing. They watched it burn, and then they helped put it out for good. Number 2. Nanih Waiya, the mother mound no one is allowed to dig. To the Choctaw, this is not a curiosity on a list. It is the beginning of everything. Nanih Waiya is a platform mound in Winston County in east-central Mississippi, about 25 feet tall, roughly 140 feet by 220, once surrounded on 3 sides by a circular earthwork that enclosed something close to a full square mile. 1 mile to the east across the county line, there is a natural hill with a cave inside it. For the Choctaw, that cave is the place their people emerged onto the surface of the earth. The mound is the mother mound. The name itself is often translated as the Leaning Hill. The Choctaw and the Chickasaw alongside them have venerated this place as their sacred origin since at least the 17th century. Their oral histories tell it in more than one way, of a people emerging from the earth here, and of a long migration that ended at this spot when a sacred leaning pole, carried for years, finally stood upright in the ground and told them they were home. Here is what sets Nanih Waiya apart from every other mound in this state. It has never been excavated. Almost every other major mound in Mississippi has been dug, mapped, sampled, carbon dated. Nanih Waiya has not, out of respect, because it is sacred ground, and because the people to whom it is sacred have not permitted it. The earliest archaeological evidence suggests it was first built in the Middle Woodland period, somewhere around the first few centuries AD. But the honest answer about its exact age is that no one truly knows, and no one will unless and until the Choctaw Nation decides otherwise. The uncertainty is not a gap in the research, it is a choice being respected, and the history of this place is heavy in a way the others are not. During the Indian removals of the 1830s, the Choctaw lost control of their mother mound. The land that held the origin place of an entire people passed into private hands, and later became a state park, owned and operated by the same government that had forced them out. It stayed that way for generations. Some Choctaw families had refused to leave Mississippi at all, in part because the mound was too sacred to abandon. They stayed near their mother, as orphans on their own ancestral land. It took until the 21st century to set right. In 2007, a Mississippi Senate bill authorized the transfer, and in 2008, after 178 years, Nanih Waiya was formally returned to the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. The tribe now marks the return every August with Nanih Waiya Day, gathering and dancing at the mound that was taken and given back. So this is not a place you visit casually. It survives, stewarded by the Choctaw as the sacred site it has always been, the cave still sitting a mile to the east in its wooded hill. If you ever go, you go quietly and with permission. There is a kind of mystery here that no excavation could solve and no documentary should pretend to. The most ancient and sacred structure in the state is also the one we have agreed not to pry open. A monument whose meaning belongs to the people, who never stopped believing in it, and whose age remains deliberately, a thing we have chosen not to know. Number 1. Emerald Mound. You turn off the Natchez Trace onto a narrow side road, the pavement rough and broken in places, and then the trees open and you see it. At first your brain refuses the scale. It reads as a hill, a long green flat-topped hill rising out of a mowed field. Then you start walking toward it, and it keeps not getting smaller, and you realize the top is as wide as a couple of football fields, and there are stairs cut into the side, because you cannot simply stroll up something this large. The wind moves across the open plateau at the top. From up there the country rolls away in every direction, quiet, almost reverent. People who climb it tend to go silent, and then it lands. None of this is a hill. Every ounce of it was carried here by hand. This is Emerald Mound, about 10 miles northeast of Natchez. It covers roughly 8 acres. The primary platform is around 770 feet long, 435 feet wide, and 35 feet high. It is the second largest ceremonial mound in all of North America. Only one is bigger, Monk's Mound at Cahokia, far up the river in Illinois. There is nothing else on this continent in its size class except those two. It was built starting around 1350 AD by the Plaquemine culture, the ancestors of the Natchez. And the method is the thing that should genuinely stop you. They had no draft animals, no wheel, no metal tools. What they did was take an existing natural hill, trim its top flat, and build up its sides, one carried basket of earth at a time, until the whole thing became a single artificial plateau. Then, on top of that plateau, they raised still more mounds. 6 smaller summit mounds once lined the top, 3 to a side. Here is the wild part. This was not a tomb or a monument to stand and admire. It was a stage, a working religious and political center for the whole surrounding chiefdom, in active use for something like 350 years. Ceremonies, gatherings, the seat of power for an entire people. All of it conducted on an 8-acre platform that they had willed into existence out of dirt and labor and time. The people who built Emerald are the same people who, in the late 1600s, moved their capital about 12 miles southwest to the grand village of the Natchez, number 3 on this list. Emerald was the earlier seat. The grand village was where the story ended. The two sites are chapters of the same history, and you can stand on both in the same afternoon. Then came the long erasure. After the Natchez left, plows and erosion went to work on the summit. The 6 smaller mounds that once crowned the top were flattened down to almost nothing. What survived, what you climb today, is the immense primary platform, still massive enough to make a grown adult feel small. The site was first seriously investigated back in 1838, and researchers have returned to it on and off ever since. It is now a National Historic Landmark, maintained by the Park Service, with interpretive signs and those stairs to the top. And the honest mystery of Emerald is not who built it. We know exactly who built it. The mystery is the sheer human will behind it. How a society without machines or animals organized the labor, the planning, the food, the years, to move that much earth by hand into a shape that has outlasted everything around it by 6 centuries. We can describe how the mounds on top were probably used. We cannot really feel, from where we stand, what it took to make the thing at all. That is the image to leave you with. Not a ruin, not a pile of rocks behind a fence, a green artificial mountain, 8 acres wide, sitting in a Mississippi field where most people speed past on the highway without ever turning off. The second largest structure of its kind on the continent, built basket by people whose descendants are still here, and almost nobody knows it exists. Stand on top of it, in the wind, and try to count the baskets. You will lose the number long before you reach the edge. Mississippi hides its oldest history in plain sight. Mounds beside highways, in forests, in flat delta fields most people never stop to see. For me, the one that stays is Nanih, a mound so sacred its own people have chosen never to let it be dug. Returned to them after 178 years. Which one surprised you most? Or did we miss one near you? Tell us below. If forgotten history is what you are here for, subscribe. We go looking every week.